Hello, everyone. I'm Adam McGee, president of the Balloon Training Academy. So, what I'm going to do now is record this presentation that I give at safety seminars, and this one's on the accident mythbusters. And so, I'm going to record this unedited raw video to kind of make it as live as possible. But of course, I don't have you all face to face to be able to read your visual cues and answer questions and interact and all of that. But we'll get started with a little bit about me. So later this year, I'll celebrate 25 years since my first balloon flight. My mom is a commercial balloon pilot and got involved in ballooning and when I was young, and took my first flight when I was 5 years old. I've always had a passion for safety and training. I began volunteering at balloon camps as soon as I could, as soon as I turned 18, and through kind of balloon camps, had the idea to create this balloon training academy. I'm an FA safety team representative, a Wings Pro, Drone Pro. 2019, I was named the FA's Flight Instructor of the Year. Published articles in the FA Safety Briefing magazine, published articles in the BFA Balloon magazine, and I'm a designated pilot examiner for balloons. First, want to ask, who's this? Ben Franklin, right? And what was Ben Franklin's impact on ballooning? How is he known in balloon circles? Ben Franklin was, there for the first balloon flight. And he wrote in his journal on November 21st, 1783, about observing this liftoff in the majestic manner and reaching about 250 feet. The pilots lowering their hats to salute the spectators, and he wrote about this feeling of awe and admiration of the pilots. But do you guys know what Ben Franklin's connection to balloon accidents is? Well, he wrote this, or known for saying that we're all born ignorant, but one must work hard to remain stupid. Well, he didn't actually write this for balloon accidents, of course, but it's very relatable to balloon accidents. This idea that, we're all born ignorant, but we must work hard to remain stupid because, balloon accidents haven't changed a lot over time. Balloons are still having accidents the same manner that they've been from the beginning. We're not very good at really learning from our mistakes and growing past our mistakes, right? We're kind of doing these same things. We're remaining ignorant, or actually we're remaining stupid, really. We're ignorant to a lot of these things that we know cause accidents, and we'll go through a lot of those throughout this presentation. So there's a lot of myths about accidents, and these myths are created to shy away from the truth. So what we've done is we have this analysis of NTSB reported accidents from 2005 to 2019. So an accident is where an aircraft has substantial damage, death, or serious injury. This doesn't include incidences, occurrences, or of course unreported. The objective of this presentation is to solve many myths on accidents, and discuss our ignorance which leads to accidents, and provide solutions to overcome our ignorance. So I have this poll, but it's a live in-person poll of all the myths that we're going to talk about, but we'll have to skip over since this is recording, and we'll just jump right into the myths. So myth number 1. So private pilots have more accidents than commercial pilots. Is this a myth? Or is this true, right? So you always hear that commercial pilots have a higher certificate and are safer. So this is false, right? So 86% of balloon accidents involve commercial pilots. You can see that on this image here. So the extra info that you need to really kind of analyze this is that 69% of active balloon pilots are commercial rated, 31% are private. Commercial pilots likely fly more flights, so of course they'd be involved in more accidents. So really kind of the analysis of this myth is that it doesn't really provide us a reasoning for accidents, right? We can't say that um, a private pilot is going to have more accidents um, because, or a commercial pilot's going to have more. A commercial pilot's going to have all the accidents, and a private pilot's not. Well, 69. Most of the balloonists are commercial pilots, are commercially rated. So of course, it's going to be more of your commercial pilots involved in accidents because there's more of them out there. So myth number 2. So pilots under 45 years old have the most accidents. So older pilots, um, older pilots are more experienced and safer, they said. So this is false. So roughly 77% of accidents are pilots 45 and older. All right, you can see that from this graph here, right? So 77% are from this 45 on up age, right? Most are in this 55 to 65 range, right? Close to 40% of all accidents are from those 55 to 65 years old. But here's some extra info. So roughly 82% of active pilots are aged 50 to 69. So pilots over the age of 45 are likely flying the most flights, so of course they would have the most accidents. So again, this doesn't really provide us a reasoning for the accidents because, 77% of the accidents are pilots over 45 years old, but yeah, I mean, 82% of the active pilots are, over 45 years old. So again, it doesn't really give us much information to really kind of point a finger to what's causing all of these accidents. So myth number 3. So lower hour pilots have the most accidents. So they always say, less experience leads to more accidents, right? Well, that's false. So roughly 54% of accidents are pilots who qualify for the BFA's highest level of the Pilot Achievement Award program, right? So over 700 hours. Right, you can see less than 25 hours has the least number of accidents. Over 700 has the most accidents. The different colors here is this line is actually at balloon races. This data we actually compiled originally for the balloon event guidelines, where we kind of separated balloon events and not balloon events. So you combine them together and you get the overall. But we kept this split out since most of our data was already split this way. The extra info. So of course, those who are commercial and are flying more hours, and yes, we know that they're older, they will have more accidents as a byproduct of flying more of the hours. But it's important to note that we might have gained a little bit of information of our ignorance, right? We might have a little information of the ignorant to increased experience could lead to more risk, right? But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So here's a typical accident example for the 3 myths, right? So we have a private pilot. They're 72 years old. They have 684 hours. They're flying a 90 with a pilot plus 2 passengers. So according to the pilot's accident report, he was making an approach to land in a farm field. About 10 feet above the ground, he pulled the vent. The balloon struck the ground, traveling about 15 miles an hour, tipped over. He was dragged by the wind across the field for 60 feet. A gust of wind lifted him back into the air about 20 feet high. He pulled the vent again, traveled another 128 feet. The basket struck the ground hard. The wind dragged the balloon for another 30 feet, striking ditches on both sides of the road. Then traveled another 88 feet through grass. The balloon was not damaged. However, one passenger sustained serious injuries, and second passenger sustained minor injuries. So when I read these, I always like to put myself in their shoes and really kind of think, all right, what happened here, and what caused this accident, and you're reading through that and you think, it was just a windy day, just had this high wind landing. That can happen to anyone. But then you read this next part, and it says, according to the Federal Aviation Administration FAA inspector, There were 18 balloons at the launch site, including the FAA inspector. Huh. The inspector had unpacked his balloon, but did not launch. No other pilots unpacked their balloons due to the high winds aloft. The accident pilot was the only one to take off. You kind of joke a little bit and you say, well, shoot, if there's an FAA inspector in the same launch field as me and he doesn't take off and I do, you kind of think about that. But all jokes aside, but what is really happening here, right? What makes someone fly in these conditions? And so one graph that I always like to show to students kind of explain our ignorance. I always like to explain to students kind of, when they get their private check ride, they're kind of right here on this wisdom and confidence, right? So they're low on confidence, they know nothing as far as wisdom, but they get this private check ride, they start gaining hours, start flying a whole lot, right? That confidence skyrockets, right? But they're still in this know nothing category, right? But they become this 150-hour, master pilot, all right? But then things start happening, right? Things start happening and start kind of diminishing that confidence, but as they still know nothing. And this is where actual learning via narrowly avoiding screw ups happen, right? So they're really kind of starting to learn things out on their own because their confidence was so high, and they start narrowly avoiding these screw ups to eventually they almost bend metal, and their confidence hit this low point here, right? And then this is kind of what you want going forward. This kind of actually managing to say no to something in this kind of growth period where they then come to understand prior stupidity up here, right? Where they become a guru with their high confidence. But certain things kind of affect this flow, right? How where it can kind of spike up, drop down, spike up, drop down, maybe flatten out here. Different things kind of happen. Different forces really kind of push a pilot in their thinking around. And so what are those forces, right? It's the hazardous attitudes. And I don't know if you know the mission of the FAA. The mission of the FAA is to create, the safest aerospace system in the world. And these hazardous attitudes were created by the FAA, and they're created for a reason because pilots are often ignorant of these hazardous attitudes, and you can see the impact of these hazardous attitudes on accidents, right? So this anti-authority, don't tell me what to do, this impulsivity, do something quickly, the invulnerability, it won't happen to me, macho, I can do it, resignation, where it's what's the use, right? And you see those kind of antidotes there. And it's always really simple to really point these out in accidents because you can see the accident and you can read the analysis and really kind of be like, hey, that pilot was really macho, or that pilot showed invulnerability. Easy for me to say, right? It won't happen to me. But what does that really look like? So just some kind of examples of how it usually occurs in some areas that maybe you don't quite think about as really exhibiting hazardous attitudes, but that anti-authority. So when it comes to maintenance, do we log it? Do we not log it? Does the pilot do it or does the repairman do it? Those are all kind of things of, sometimes we don't log everything that we're supposed to log as far as maintenance. And, sometimes we might log stuff that a repairman's supposed to be doing. As far as flight reviews, are we doing them, the letter of the law? Currency, are we doing that the letter of the law, or are we just hopping up on a tie off, bouncing up and down 3 times and taking off? Are we really actually getting current by 3 takeoffs and 3 landings before we take passengers? So you always have to remember, follow the rules, right? The rules are always written in blood. they are usually right, right? The rules are there for a reason, and that reason is safety. You then look at impulsivity. A good one, a good example of that is the go no go decision, right? So when you're out in the launch field and you hear someone's fans starting, right? What's everyone do? Starts their fans, right? So that kind of impulsivity that you need to go and go quickly and go now. Um, you also see it in pilot decision making. When weather changes in flight and landing options, right? So weather changes, what's the first thing you do? You immediately want to get down, right? And you see that pilots kind of stop thinking, which we'll get to a little later in this presentation. But you always have to remember that it's not so fast. Think first, right? Safety first. Then you have invulnerability. And a good example of that is flying in marginal conditions, right? You always hear, I've done this before, or it's not worse than that one time, or, that sort of thing. And you always have to remember, it could happen to me, right? Safety is no accident. You then get into macho, and that's flying in marginal conditions and then bragging about it, right? Being the only one to fly to show the crowd why balloons aren't flying. Yeah, think about that one again. Being the only one to fly to show the crowd why the balloons aren't flying. Think you might be macho a little bit? Or even inflating for the crowd on a windy night that the flight was canceled. Does that show a little bit of macho in it? Yeah. So remember, taking chances is foolish, right? And so did that accident that we discussed a little bit ago, did that show signs of macho? Absolutely, right? They're the only one that got their equipment out besides the FAA inspector, and they were the only ones that flew, right? Definitely showed signs of macho. Then we have resignation. So that's when you damage the balloon due to poor execution or conditions change that you had no choice but to burn some panels or gift wrap a tree. You often say it's part of being a pilot. But you have to remember that you're not helpless, right? You can make a difference. You don't have to gift wrap that tree. You don't have to burn a lot of the panels, right? You can make a difference. You can fly the balloon. You just have to do it. So we have a lot of room for improvement in this area, and really being able to not only recognize but act on recognizing these hazardous attitudes. And I always say it's this, speak up, see something, say something. But it's often extremely difficult, especially if you don't know the other person well. So one thing that we do personally between my wife and I is, um, you know, we have ourselves, but you can have someone you trust on your crew, pilots around you, just someone that can end your flight, no questions asked. So even if you're debating kind of that go no go decision, or something comes up on inflation, have someone that can be able to pull that vent line, and you trust their opinion, you respect their opinion, to where if they say you're not going to get today, you're not going. Hopefully someone helping you, maybe seeing some of these hazardous attitudes or seeing something that you can't see, will help prevent an accident, right? So if you're out in that launch field and you see that one balloon going and everyone's looking at them like, this dude's crazy, it's windy as hell out here. um, Having that person that you can trust to say, hey, you're a little macho today, let's pull that red line out, let's not fly, there's a better day. Again, this is really tough. Some people, I don't know, they might start throwing punches and stuff, but you it just helps to have someone that you trust and respect, that you allow make these decisions for you, especially if you're not seeing things clearly. So we transition now to myth number 4. So recency of experience doesn't matter. Ballooning is like riding a bike. I can jump back in with little recency of experience, they said. So this myth is false. So roughly 48% of all accidents involve pilots who have 15 or fewer hours in the last 90 days, right? So it shows that we may be ignorant to lack of proficiency could lead to more risk, right? So some extra info. So there's a spike at over 50 hours in the last 90 days, right? So this is likely, again, those older commercial pilots flying frequent paid rides, which that shows, of course, that increased experience could lead to more risk, right? That we're ignorant to complacency and all of that, like we had talked about. But we're focusing, of course, on this area. And here's an accident example of this. So it's a commercial pilot. They have 11 hours in the last 90 days. They have 16 hours total time in that aircraft. It's a 105. Most of their flying is done in a 65 racer. All right, so proficiency also includes in the balloon at which you're flying, right? So this commercial pilot stated that after departure in the balloon, the surface wind increased to about 20 knots during the 1 hour flight. Due to the balloon's direction of flight approaching restricted airspace, the pilot decided to land at the first suitable landing site, which was bordered by power lines and trees to the north and residential homes 100 yards to the south. He landed the balloon in a steep descent to reduce the risk of the basket being dragged on the ground and briefed the passengers to bend their knees and brace for impact. The basket made firm ground contact upon landing and tipped over. The wind dragged the basket about 30 feet before it came to rest. One passenger sustained a broken foot during the hard landing. So then we come to, how are we ignorant, right? How do we, how can we improve on this? And one area is keeping currency, also known as proficiency, and actually doing the 3 takeoffs and 3 landings in the aircraft that we're flying, right? So for this pilot, they only had 16 hours total time in a 105. Most of their flying was in a 65 racer, right? So to jump from a 65 where you might have one passenger to a 105, we're having multiple passengers in a bigger balloon, and trying to execute a steep descent to landing is a very hard maneuver to execute, especially if you're flying a much bigger balloon, right? There's a lot more risk for you to make a hard impact with the ground, trying to perform this maneuver in a balloon that you're not very proficient in. But it comes down to keeping currency and actually doing the 3 takeoffs and 3 landings and actually practicing those to keep your skills up before you're taking passengers. I know there's some pilots who will sit there and first flight of the year, they'll sit there on their tie off and they'll go up and down 3 times, log it, and then have their passengers hop in. But make sure we're keeping current, make sure we're keeping proficiency, especially when we're taking passengers. One other thing we're often ignorant about in that currency, but one thing you can do to combat it is fly with another pilot or commercial pilot, even if you don't have to do a flight review, especially if you're out of currency or flying less frequently. So, that first flight of the year, you might not need a flight review, but go fly with that commercial pilot. Go practice maneuvers, go practice different techniques, kind of gain that proficiency, get that extra checkup. Another thing you can do is join the FAA safety team, which I cannot spell FAA safety team, missed the E there. But the purpose of the FAA safety team is to reduce the accident level in general aviation, right? So the accident level in commercial aviation is a 0 tolerance, right? That's the absolute worst thing that can happen as far as the FAA goes. But in general aviation, there's an acceptable rate of accidents, and the FAA safety team is there to reduce the accident rate in general aviation, right? That's the whole purpose of the FAA safety team, is for accident reduction in general aviation. So, joining the FAA safety team by participating in the wings program, complete a phase of wings once a year or twice a year, 3 times a year, however much you can do. But pilots are often ignorant of the wings program. not knowing how it works, how it can benefit you. But the whole idea, again, of the Wings program is proficiency, remaining active, remaining up to date in your knowledge, your skill level flying, and going out and flying with commercial pilots and continuing to learn your craft. So, for those of you who don't know much about the Wings program, uh, this video actually counts as Wings credit. If you sign up through our website, we can get you Wings credit, and it's actually a knowledge topic. But the Wings, there's 3 phases of Wings. There's the basic Wings, advanced Wings, and master Wings. So what happens is you gain knowledge topics by completing something like this, or going to a going into the instructor symposium or safety seminar, or some of these flight activities also have knowledge activity as part of it. So if you complete a flight activity, it can sometimes count for the knowledge activity, but you complete the knowledge activities and complete the flight activities, go out with the commercial pilot, use the syllabus that are in here, and you go out and fly. Again, it's all about you, all right? So it's all about how you can improve, how you can get better, and you complete the phases, um, and just keep learning, keep working your way up. And so this is just an example um, of flying and kind of where it comes from, right? This is coming from the Commercial Pilots Practical Test Standards. So again, how are we ignorant? Um, we can improve the quality of our flight reviews, right? So we're often ignorant to proper flight reviews, kind of the anti-authority, right? So it's supposed to be 1 hour flight and 1 hour ground, right? You're supposed to use the practical test standards as a guide to plan the flight, actually instruct, go from rote to understanding to application to correlation, using those levels of learning, and discuss areas of improvement. If you're not comfortable, don't sign off. Go back. Have the pilot, perform tasks again. Because it's important, because if there's accident or enforcement action, um, the first place the FAA will look is that flight review. Who gave the flight review? Who signed off this person on the flight review? They want to know what you covered. Did you notice that this airman was deficient in this area? That sort of thing. And one thing that the Wings program does is it reduces your liability, because when you participate in the Wings program, when you complete a phase of Wings, it actually counts as a flight review. And that liability piece comes in because the commercial pilot isn't actually giving you um, signing off on that flight review. So once you complete that phase of Wings, you actually get a system generated certificate that you can print out, and that counts as your flight review, and it's signed by the FAA safety team overall manager. And so it really kind of takes that liability off of you as a commercial pilot, giving the flight review, because it's not your signature attached to it, it's the Wings program now attached to it. So another benefit of why it's a good idea to use the Wings program is it reduces your liability in this flight review. But um, the Wings program also counts as a flight review because it is the knowledge and flight portion, and it's, again, you're continually learning, you're taking the time out for yourself to really improve and get better. And that's what it's all about. And that's why the FAST team's there. And again, we're often ignorant to, these things that the FAA has in place, whether it's the hazardous attitudes or the Wings program, or the different regulations about flight reviews. We're ignorant to the reason why it's there and how it prevents accidents. All right, so we got myth number 5 here. And that myth is most accidents occur at balloon events, right? So there's always so much pressure to fly at balloon events, they said. And you can see that this is false. So roughly 54% of accidents occur during business paid ride flights. So that kind of extra info, we're ignorant to those things we are unaware of which have a negative impact on our flights. So I'll give you an accident example here. So it's a commercial pilot since 1993. They have many hours, over 100 in the past year. They wake up, check the weather for a morning flight, all reporting VFR, good winds. So there's not much more I can say about this accident to hide the details of the accident. This accident, of course, is the Lockhart balloon accident. But let's analyze this accident through the FAA's PAVE and I'm Safe checklist. And we call this kind of the unawareness checklist. What does it stand for? So the P in PAVE is personal. So in this instance, the Skip Nichols Lockhart accident, there was no record of a current flight review, nor did anyone step up to say that they gave Skip their flight review. Of course, right? No one would want to take that responsibility on. And then you kind of inside personal, you find the I'm safe checklist. So illness, right? Skip had ADHD, depression, insomnia, and a whole slew of other illnesses. Medication, we're all well aware of his cocktail of medications. Stress, he had financial stress, was written about in the newspapers. Could have had an impact on his flight. We have alcohol, it's well been talked about as DUIs and alcohol issues. Fatigue, they talk about insomnia. Eating, they talk about as diabetes and diabetic issues. Then you're back in the A and PAVE, and you have aircraft. The NTSB couldn't find records of the balloon in annual. Environment, of course, the changing weather. And then the E in PAVE, external pressure. Again, those financial stresses. But this is kind of the extreme case, right, where you can check all the boxes, the wrong way. And really, it's easy to see PAVE and I'm safe checklists in an accident like this, just because it checked all the wrong boxes, right? It checked all these the wrong way, and so it's really easy to kind of see this accident. If I stand up on my soapbox for a second, but a lot of these things were really high, and they were high for many flights, right? His illnesses he dealt with for a long time, medication for a lot of time, stress, alcohol, fatigue, eating. His aircraft could have been out of annual forever. But kind of really the one that really kind of tipped the scales, right? When you think about this was all an accident waiting to happen, um, it was waiting for this, for the environment, for that changing weather to kind of be that perfect storm to really kind of spark it and create this accident. So, um, we always say that these checklists, um, it's a risk assessment, and you can fly risky for a long time, and all it takes is that one link in the error chain to go awry, and you have yourself an accident. But again, this was an extreme example where you can see all of PAVE and I'm safe checked the wrong way. But how does that really look? How does that look in kind of an everyday flight? So personal, right? So your illnesses, you might be sick, you might have a cold, you might have a sinus infection. Medication, you might be taking over-the-counter medications, um, allergy medications. So make sure that you're following, um, 5 times the dosage interval on these medications that cause drowsiness and all those kind of things. Make sure your stress, your financial stress, your work stress, your home stress, the balloon competition stress isn't really affecting your flight. Alcohol, make sure you're following the rules, the 8 hours bottle to throttle, the 0.04 blood alcohol content. Make sure as far as fatigue, did you get enough sleep? Did you just drive 12 hours, the day or night before to get to this balloon event? Make sure you're not fatigued and you're ready to fly. As far as eating, if you're a diabetic, make sure you are able to combat that. Make sure your blood sugar levels are okay. For your aircraft, making sure you have no unrepaired damage, no burned cables or tears, those sorts of things. For your environment, making sure that there's no changing weather, or if you're in an unfamiliar area, you're doing the things necessary to become familiar with the area. You're talking to locals, you're studying wind patterns, looking up um, different landing spots on Google Maps or that sort of thing. When it comes to external pressure, again, the financial stresses, other pilots, event organizers, etc. Making sure that those are all in check. And so we always say to kind of be aware of your unawareness, right? Because you don't know how these things will ultimately affect you, right? But those armchair quarterbacks, when you have an accident, they'll know how those affected you, right? Those armchair quarterbacks will tear you apart on social media. So, um, you know, uh, don't be an accident waiting to happen, right? Where that invulnerability really comes from, right? Because once you kind of get away with it, you start saying, well, it won't happen to me. I've done this a million times. It won't happen now. Because all it takes is that one other thing to be slightly different to kind of break that error chain, and now all of a sudden you have an accident. So how are we ignorant again is, we don't use checklists, and all of that. And we actually have on our website these checklists that you can get, and we're happy to provide these checklists. We've provided over 1,500 of these checklists because we really like to see balloonists using checklists and assessing their flights before they fly, being aware of their unawareness and setting their flight up for success. All right, so myth number 6 here. So most accidents occur on landing. There we have it. This one's true. So roughly 79% of accidents occur on landing. So some extra info here. We're ignorant to our training, and we're ignorant to passenger briefings. So here's an example of a typical landing accident. So we're a 60-year-old commercial pilot, 2,455 hours, 5 hours the last 90 days. It's a personal flight, a 77 pilot plus 2 passengers. So while landing in a field, the wind shifted and the hot air balloon impacted a tree. The balloon then ascended approximately 50 feet back in the air. The pilot cautioned his 2 passengers to brace for a hard landing. The balloon descended rapidly and hit the ground hard. The basket rolled on its side, and one of the passengers fell out. The passenger impacted the ground face first, breaking her nose and cheekbone. The balloon again lifted off the ground before settling back for its final landing. The pilot reported that there were no and I can't even say that word. There wasn't anything wrong with the balloon. So how are we ignorant? So we often give very poor or no passenger briefings. So checklist appears 37 times in the private pilot practical test standards and 24 times in the commercial practical test standards, right? So again, the FAA knows that checklist usage is very important to prevent accidents, right? That's why it's written there so many times, because checklists help prevent impulsivity, right? Stop and think. Stop, go through a checklist. Stop, brief your passengers, right? But we're often ignorant to something that the FAA, tells us we need to be doing, right? So again, we have these passenger briefing checklists on our website. We're happy to provide these to people because this is what causes accidents, right? We're very bad at briefing passengers. And when you go through all these NTSB accidents, you see the same common themes, right? That we're breaking passengers' bones because we're not briefing them properly, we're not positioning them properly. They're not ready for impact. They're falling out. They're, reaching out with their hands, or, all sorts of things. To where if we stop and think, right, we're not so impulsive, and we give these briefings, we can hopefully prevent some of these accidents from occurring. So I want to give another example here. So this is a 59-year-old commercial pilot. They have 290 hours, 8 hours in the last 90 days. It's a balloon event flight, a 77 pilot and passenger. So the pilot and passenger departed on a balloon flight and had been airborne for a little over an hour before making 3 attempts to land. The wind was too strong on the first attempt. On the next attempt, they found themselves over a residential subdivision and prevented them from landing. The pilot then saw an open area on the other side of the street with power lines running along it. His intent was to get over the power lines and then drop the balloon down to the ground. They were over the road and a couple of feet over the power lines when the balloon dropped and struck the power lines. The pilot engaged the burner and the basket slid off of the 2 wires, but when the basket touched the third wire, there was an electric short and then an explosion. The pilot reported the explosion was the last thing he remembered until he found himself on the ground with the envelope going down. So, how are we ignorant? So, um, we often tell students that you're in this situation, now you have to get out, right? So you have to remember your training and execute. And it goes back to kind of that resignation, the not helpless thing, right? The things aren't just happening to you, that you have control and you have this power, you have this ability to overcome. Um, so I have this quote of, I've never left one up there. And it's really kind of my favorite quote from going to the National Balloon Museum Hall of Fame inductions. And, every year they always, have all these great Hall of Famers come back and talk. And, one of them had said, I've never left one up there, meaning that they've always landed a balloon, right? That there's always something. And it's something I always tell students is that um, your spot will come. Don't force a landing because something's happening, right? That impulsivity. Don't force a landing because the winds are picking up, because you're running out of fuel. Because when you force something, when you're acting on this impulse, you often forget your training, right? You don't execute properly, and you're so focused on getting down that you create an accident because you're acting on such impulse. But we always tell students that your spot will come. Don't force a landing because you've never left one up there. You'll get down. The time will come for you to execute the landing, and you've got to execute that landing based on your training and the skills that you've gained over the years. So then, of course, we played a quiz. Which since it's not live, we can't play and handed out some prizes. But um, just as conclusion, again, there's a lot of things that we're ignorant to as balloonists that we know prevent accidents, right? The FAA has created a lot of great tools because the FAA's mission, of course, is to increase safety, to reduce accidents, and to have the safest aerospace system in the world. That they have a lot of these things as far as hazardous attitudes checklists, the FAA safety team, all of these things that prevent accidents that the FAA knows prevents accidents, but we are often ignorant of them ourselves, and kind of how they prevent accidents. We're very complacent, as pilots. So with that, this was actually the presentation before lunch. So everyone was hungry. But if you guys have any questions on anything, feel free to reach out to us. Visit our website www.theballoontrainingacademy.com. You can sign up to get some checklists and some passenger briefing cards. And of course, if you want a refresher on any of the knowledge topics, you can go to our website and sign up for our private or commercial ground school courses or flight instructor refresher courses. We can also send you a training syllabus and all sorts of resources. But feel free to reach out to us. We're always willing to help. Thanks, and hope you found this helpful.